Welcome back to the second day of our first conference sponsored by the Tower of David Jerusalem Museum on accessibility in historic sites and cities. My name is Rose Genosar. I manage special projects here at the museum. Before we begin, I just want to tell you a few technical details. We welcome your questions. We hope to be able to answer all of them at the discussions at the end of each session. I would ask that you write them into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them as soon as possible and as many as possible. Closed captioning is available. You can see that there is a CC icon. Just click on it and you can have closed captioning. If you, by chance, leave a session, just remember your registration link is the same for every session. And now let's begin. I want to introduce Eilat Lieber, who is the director and chief curator of the Tower of David Jerusalem Museum, and she will welcome you back tonight.
So welcome back, everyone, to our second day of the global online conference on accessibility in historic sites and cities. Thank you, Rose. I really have the honor to be the director and chief curator of this fabulous museum that was renovated in the last 4 years. Our main issue was, first of all, to renew the exhibition that tells the rich history of Jerusalem to all. It's a very long history, 4,000 years of a rich story and the significance of the city to the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And of course, especially here today, I would like to pray for peace for all those who are not at home right now. And we really need peace for all the citizens of this region. The museum located in the beautiful ancient citadel of Jerusalem called Tower of David. It's an amazing fortress representing all the layers from the history of Jerusalem from the Canaanite period till modern time. But of course, this fortress was never meant to be a museum. So when we started planning our update and new museum, we had, first of all, to bring the archaeologists in and discuss the meaning of the big change. Of course, one of our main goals was to make this site accessible to all. But they were really conservative, and we had to negotiate with them and convince them that in the 21st century, we need to be inclusive and open this museum to all. Some of them thought actually that it will harm the antiquities and will change the uniqueness of the site. And we had to sit with architects, designers, and experts to find solutions for accessibility, because we wanted this place to be open to all, for people with disabilities, for tourists from all over the world, all ages. And it was a real challenge, because we had to find the very gentle balance between technology and modern technology and the beauty of the antiquities and the past. You have to know that the Tower of David is the gateway to the old city of Jerusalem, right near the main gate to the old city, to the four quarters of the old city. Most of our visitors will actually continue from here to visit the holy places inside the old city of Jerusalem. No matter if they're Jewish, Christians, or Muslims, they will walk through the gate, the Tower of David, and continue visiting the old city. That's why it was very important actually to be able to work together with Jerusalem municipality and all the institutions around us to make sure that not just inside the museum, the visitor will find solutions for accessibility, but also in the continuance of the visit inside. And today we are talking about tourism and accessibility. And we are going to hear from our speakers and experts about challenges and solutions. And now I want to have our honored guest, Ivor Ambrose, Manager Director of the European Network for Accessible Tourism, to moderate this session. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Eilat. Thank you very much. So, as you heard, my name is Ivor Ambrose. I'm the Managing Director of ENAT, which is the European Network for Accessible Tourism. We've had this network, this non-profit association, for 16 years now. We're based in Brussels, in Belgium. And why on earth do we need an association for accessible tourism? Well, accessible tourism isn't something that most students learn about when they go to hotel or tourism management school. In fact, it's still a rarity to find any kind of training or even education about accessibility in tourism. We started our organization to bring together two worlds, really, the world of disability and the world of tourism, because they really didn't know each other that well. So what we're going to talk about today is what's been labeled as the growing demand for accessible tourism, because there really is a need for better accessibility for every kind of disability, but all kinds of people with particular access requirements. And our role, our mission, is to promote the good practices in accessible tourism to all the players across the whole visitor journey, across the whole chain of accessibility. So we deal with transportation, information, built environment, and customer service as key issues and key areas of concern. So today, I should say that we're very, very pleased to be part of this World Conference, all online, but working together with the Tower of David and one of our members of ENAT Access Israel to bring this conference to you. We have some very interesting speakers for you this evening. You will have seen in the program, we have Igor Stefanovic from UN Tourism, formerly known as UN World Tourism Organization. He's a technical coordinator. He will be talking from the policy point of view about how to improve accessibility in tourism, but also some very practical measures and guidance from him. We'll be hearing from Tamar Makharashvili, who is from Tbilisi, Georgia. She works with the Tbilisi Development Fund, the Asian Development Bank, and was one of the originators, the founding member of an organization that provides accessible tourism in Georgia. And thirdly, we will hear from Jeremy Buzzell, who's a manager at the Park Accessibility for Visitors and Employees in National Parks in the United States of America. So I wanted just to say a few words about accessible tourism and why it is a growing area of importance in tourism. And I think I'll just focus on one fact that we all know so well. We've been through a COVID pandemic. The whole world has been through this pandemic. It was a time when many tourist businesses had to cut down or even close their operations temporarily. Many also disappeared, and many of our members also suffered under that that very desperate time, really. But the important thing about the pandemic, as we've come out of the pandemic, is to see that tourism is coming back in a different way. Tourism has made, the pandemic has made us aware that tourism needs to be more responsive to people's requirements, people's needs. And some of those needs have to do with accessibility. We can see that the tourism sector is reflecting much more on how they treat their tourists, their visitors, and that goes right across the spectrum. And today, as yesterday, we're focusing particularly on heritage, on cultural heritage, whether it is in monuments and buildings, or also in national parks, as we'll hear in our third speaker's presentation. So I think it's important to see how tourism is about to turn a corner here, I think, after COVID, and develop in a new direction And perhaps that's something we need to think about in terms of the growing demand that comes from tourists with disabilities, and especially the growing population of older people. So now let me hand over to Igor Stefanovic. I've introduced him very briefly. He might say a few words about his own role in UN tourism. Thank you, Igor. Please.
Thank you very much, Ivor. And I wish to thank also the Tower of David Museum that we've been in touch with for the past 12 months, and we've learned from their great good practice, and that's why I decided to support this webinar, and it's a pleasure to be moderated by Ivor, because we have been working with Eilat from the very first moment they got established, almost. So I would say at least 15 years we have been working together, and we have produced, hopefully, a lot of know-how or knowledge for the sector. So, and I hope it's useful, because sometimes you don't see the end user on the other side, but I'm just today in Croatia. And so the things that we produce on accessible tourism, they really kind of come to different corners of the world. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to speak about matching the human rights, the business case, and the conservation criteria, because I think these are the pillars that we have as the basis of our discussion. I'm in charge of ethics, culture, and social responsibility at UN Tourism, and I've been specialized by my personal, I would say by my area of work in accessibility for about 15 years. And the weird thing is, and it's also a question of destiny, I guess, 7 years ago, I had no disability and I had cancer and I got amputated. So now I work on accessible tourism with a physical disability. So it's an interesting perspective from before and also nowadays. We are also going to speak about addressing the growing demand for accessible tourism. Normally, Ivor is the person who gets invited by us to explain the business case of accessibility, because personally, I believe that if you have human rights case, you always need a business case, because otherwise the private sector and SMEs won't really buy in. They need to understand that there's always money behind the rights. And unfortunately, that's the way the world works. And I think that's the best approach. And it's also with the heritage. I would say with the heritage, we need to understand that why would we have cultural heritage if not everybody can enjoy access to leisure and to culture and heritage? So I think the access should be in equal conditions, but of course in heritage we need to observe conservation criteria. So I will start with this first slide. It's about our senses, and it's about accessibility. It's about touching things. It's about experiencing the sea. It's about experiencing the jets of the Renaissance fountains in the Tivoli World Heritage Site in Rome, if you can't see them, but maybe you can touch them, you can feel the structure. It's about refurbishing an old village that is a heritage village in Portugal, so old people wouldn't end up in nursery homes and residents if they want to live in the place where they were born. It's also about bringing kids, bringing up children in the village where you want to live. So you can adapt things that are already listed as heritage, but there are ways like this pavement that you can deal with. It's also about...
We don't have the slides. We don't have the slide at the moment.
You don't have it?
No.
Because it says that I'm sharing screen here.
Ah.
Let me see. Maybe I need
to...
No,
you share the screen and everybody sees it.
Sorry, so I have to go back.
Share it again, yes.
Sorry. This is the one. Also, it's also about touching these engravings in the Alhambra, for example. But what's the problem with the tourism sector? There are about 190 sovereign countries in the world.
Sorry, Igor. Sorry, Igor, hand up again. You have to select PowerPoint and then approve it. So it's 2 clicks to get to the sharing.
Okay, just hold on, please. Do you have it now?
Yes.
Not yet. Ah, you do?
Yes, we all do.
Everything is okay. It can continue like this.
Okay, thank you. So as there were no general and I would say universal standards on accessible tourism, we've decided with our partners, the ONCE Foundation and also the Standardization Association of Spain, to launch, I would say 8 years ago, almost an international standard on accessible tourism to start its development. Eilat was one of the main advisory bodies because we've realized that having international voluntary codes like Global Code of Ethics for Tourism or the International UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities did not really resolve the situation for the tourism sector. So this is why we produced a set of requirements and recommendations along the entire tourism value chain, meaning from the policy point of view and destinations. And we were in charge at UN Tourism in developing that chapter. Also, Eilat also was part of that chapter. But the cultural heritage and the culture is one of the main motivations of traveling for any global traveler, has also been incorporated into this standard. Why did I put this photo of Angkor Wat? Because, for example, I visited Angkor Wat when I had 2 legs, and I could go to the highest tower of this fortress, of this beautiful monument in Cambodia. So maybe I will not be able to do it again. But if we do apply different virtual reality or technological solutions, maybe we can have an experience for a person with disability without having to necessarily adapt physically the heritage site in case this is not possible given the conservation criteria, whatever. So I would never take an absolute no for an answer because there are always solutions that we can come up with, at least with the technologies. So the end users need some kind of experience. It doesn't have to be always a physical experience. What about cultural professionals and institutions? We have just seen now what the end users want. So we have worked with the International Committee of Cultural Sites and Historical Monuments, ICOMOS, also, of course, Ivor is here, and with other main partners to produce a set of recommendations on making the cultural tourism ecosystem more accessible for all. And we divided that into 3 main areas: heritage monuments and historic areas that have some common features, museums and exhibit spaces and cultural events as part of intangible cultural heritage, and also staging environments. Ivor will maybe tell you later because he's been on top of some international developments when it comes to intangible cultural heritage and tourism, because it's maybe an area that doesn't pop up to your mind when you think about cultural tourism so much, but it's very big. And it has to do with so many things. So what should we do when it comes to making cultural heritage ecosystem and mostly, let's say, cultural tourism ecosystem more accessible? I don't want to step on the foot of conservationists here. So I'll always kind of do a disclaimer. This is the cultural tourism ecosystem. So for example, we have to innovate in interpretation. It's still at a very high intellectual level. It's still extremely detailed and made for people with master's degree. So we need to first innovate in interpretation that has to do with the way we present the text, the way we present the content, and also the technology that we use. For example, digital alternatives. We need to play with materials, shapes, textures, fragrances, and we have to gather feedback from end users because we shouldn't come up with solutions in cultural tourism and heritage tourism of our own from the office, because we need to see what the visitors expect from us and from enjoying culture and tourism. For example, when it comes to heritage monuments and historic areas, we need to see, for example, that everything that is made accessible can be reversed to the original state. So conservationists shouldn't be, let's say, freaked out when they see that there's something new happening at the heritage sites. But of course, I know that the Tower of David and some other monuments have successfully integrated an elevator inside the monument. So there are also permanent solutions that can be made, but everything can be negotiated. We also have to think about intellectual disabilities, about slow, interactive, and customized tours. So we could get the students nowadays where intellectual disability is much more normalized. The diagnosis is much easier, but they also need to have better access to culture when it comes to enjoying monuments or historic areas. When it comes to museums and exhibit spaces, we have to distinguish very well the feasibility of old monumental buildings where museums are being housed from the new monuments, from the new museums. Because, for example, now new museums like the one in Giza in Egypt, of course, it's made more accessible. But then when we have Tower of David Museum in Jerusalem, it's much more challenging, and you cannot go back. So you have to really start from scratch how to adapt everything that was built 4, 3, or 2,000 years ago. And we also need to display, interpret maybe different disabilities, because besides making a building accessible, we should also portray people and situations from a reality of people living with disability throughout the history, throughout the culture, throughout different artistic expressions. I've made some of these photos on my own. I never use professional photographs because, for example, I guess Ivor can tell you what he has been doing when it comes to intangible cultural heritage and accessibility, because I put museums, theaters, and also movies and cinemas into that, because it's about different queuing procedures, but also ticket purchasing technologies. Here I have put photo of myself visiting an ancient site in Italy where you can see a reversible accessibility action of a ramp, or you can see, for example, a tactile and braille model in Italy of a monument, or also fountains in Italy where maybe we could consider adapting the gravel, because not every single monument has every single square detail that is heritage issue. Because here you see you see, for example, the steps, but maybe we could consider changing the gravel and maybe putting another surface, because that was not put 500 years ago as the monument itself. Thank you. This is a photo of myself that I like traveling very much, and I have a prosthetic leg, so I enjoy very much visiting the monuments, and history of art was one of my major passions when I was an adolescent, because I just want to send a message here. Disability does not change a person. It is the environment that needs to adapt to us and make it possible for us to enjoy fully culture and tourism. And it is not the people with disabilities or specific access requirements that are the ones all the time needing to adapt to the way the cultural tourism has been conceived. So this is the kind of equality we should all stand up for. Thank you so much. And toda rabah.
Thank you, Igor. What an excellent presentation. You summarized many things there, and I just have to... Yeah, you hear me now. So you summarized quite a lot there, and you also pointed to some very important things that I'd just like to highlight, particularly that the tourism sector and museums in particular have a very strong role to play in educating about disability. You mentioned this point about looking at the history of disability as well. When we look back through time, are we only representing the human story of active and non-disabled people? So that's a very important point that I think it's important to bring out. And it really helps to answer this most important question that you raised about how do we ensure that everyone has access, and why do we ensure that everyone has access? You know, there was a very well-known advocate for accessible tourism. Some years ago, he passed away. It's Dr. Scott Rains, and he was a wheelchair user. And he used to, he was quite an activist, you might say. And he had a very famous saying, which was to the cultural tourism sector: what is so important about this place that we would prevent some people from visiting it? And if you take that point of view, this rhetorical question, it's clear that we've moved on since that time, which was now a good 14 years ago, I think, when he first coined this phrase. We have to challenge ourselves and find out how is the best way to present our cultural heritage. You also mentioned intangible heritage, and it also reminds me that we have a lot of activities going on nowadays with virtual and extended reality. We're able to show and explain all aspects of heritage in new ways to people, to transfer information, but also to give people an experience of being part of a place, even though they're not there. And that can be very important for enjoying this intangible heritage with music, with dance, with all kinds of activities. And so 360 video, VR, that kind of thing is something that the technicians can play with, but people have to be able to use it and be part of the design of these systems. And one more point that comes from your presentation, I think, is how important it is that the cultural sector, heritage sector, is also providing accessibility information about the accessibility, the physical accessibility of the places, and also the measures that are taken to improve accessibility for people with sensory impairments or intellectual impairments or neurodiversity, etc. So it's very important that we have accessibility guides on the website, on the front page, so you can reach them from the front page of your website, and everyone then can feel welcome when they're visiting your destination. And then I think we will move on to the second speaker, and this is Tamar Makharashvili. She is also a good friend and done several projects with you in Georgia in the past, and it's great to see you now from New York, Tamar. So welcome. Tamar is representative of Tbilisi Development Fund, working with Asian Development Bank. She has over a decade of professional experience in this area and has focused her career on advocacy and development of inclusive tourism, accessibility, and universal design. She is also currently working as country advisor for the network at G3 ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs in the USA, and she serves as the founder and director of the International Institute of Universal Design Research and Education and the Inclusive Tourism Center in Tbilisi, Georgia. I'd like to invite you now to tell us about your background and how you see the situation of the increasing numbers of people who are seeking accessible tourism and how we're going to meet their demands. Thank you, Tamar.
Ivor, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to underline the immense support came from Eilat. When we started working in Georgia in 2010, we really didn't have anything to rely. So for us and for me personally, Ivor and Eilat are very important partners and friends who has helped our country to advance in many areas on development of inclusive accessible tourism, development of universal design, accessibility, introducing accessibility standards, introducing new laws in tourism. So without the support and help from Eilat, from Ivor, from Chris Feich, from Katerina, it would not be possible. So we are all connected, and thanks to these initiatives and pilot project that I will today speak and go through, it's really very inspiration for our country. First of all, I also would like to thank Igor for brilliant presentations on the work of UNWTO. For us, it's very important because we rely on these significant guidelines, significant publications, standards and recommendations. These are very important for our country, also for the Georgian National Tourist Administration. As we follow these regulations, we try, of course, to follow these regulations and to advocate and to introduce. Also, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference and the partners of the conference. Thank you for your hard work and dedication in making this conference seamless and impactful. This event, it is an important platform for sharing ideas, challenges, and solutions to make our historical sites and cities more accessible for all. We have seen this collaborative passion and commitment of the experts, policymakers, advocates, and practitioners from around the globe. So these are the brilliant, inspirational projects and pilot initiatives, as well as the regulations and innovations toward the digital accessibility, physical accessibility, services in tourism, and other very important areas. Ivor has introduced me in very detail. I'm currently also the member of the Council of the Persons with Disabilities under the Tbilisi Municipality City Hall. This council is very important in providing very important projects towards the development of inclusive tourism. During the many years, starting from the 2010, we have developed number of guidelines to raise awareness towards inclusive, accessible tourism, towards the universal design, international standards. We have also supported development of the first time in Georgian reality accessibility, Georgian national accessibility standard. It was approved in 2021, and this is a very significant step forward for our country. The guidelines were very important to have because as we conducted a number of research, the tourism industry didn't have resources, very important resources. You know that there are language barriers, and not all people know the English language, and other international resources are not accessible for them. So we have dedicated ourselves to develop these guidelines. First was inclusive urban area guidelines, and also the guidelines that who are developed and supported by the Scott Rains. You have mentioned, Ivor, the immerse work of Scott Rains in US, but he also supported our country. It was very important publication, small publication, but very impactful publication at those times that we didn't have any regulations, any laws, any standards. So it was very important to raise awareness among the stakeholders, the government institutions, and it really worked. So additionally, I wanted to underline that we have developed a number of pilot projects in both historical sites and also in different cities. And today I will discuss very briefly these important projects and why it's very important. And for other municipalities, there are 10 municipalities in Georgia. Country is really heavily relied on tourism. And it was very important to develop these pilot projects, and it will be example for other municipalities. It will support other municipalities with these important examples. Of course, this, yeah, I think that, yeah, now I will speak on the growing demand of accessible tourism, but this was a small introduction of the recent years. So all these accessibility projects also were supported by the Eilat, by Ivor, and by personally Katerina, by Chris. And we are very, very thankful for this. And during quite important summit, it was in Washington, D.C. recently, there was a panel of dedicated to inclusive tourism development in Washington, D.C. And one of the panelists and speakers asked me what is the inspiration for, who were the inspiration, and what was your inspiration, why you have started working in this direction. First, I've underlined that I've conducted very important research and found that there were huge gaps towards the accessibility of built environment, accessibility of services, and as well as digital accessibility. And during it was quite important decision to work in this sphere. I quitted my job at those time in the Ministry of Education and Science. I was working on development of inclusive education programs in 10 regions of Georgia, and I started and I founded with my colleagues, with my brilliant colleagues, the Inclusive Tourism Center, non-governmental organization, and of course, the inspiration was the Eilat, and I've underlined this on the summit, that how our colleagues and how European countries and how this international experience helped us immersively in this direction. because for us it was very hard. We were just 10 persons in the non-governmental organization when we started this journey. And for us, it was very important to have a huge support for our international colleagues from different European countries. As for the slide, the growing demand, Ivor was speaking about the importance of the research also in this sphere. So I would like to concentrate on the as now I am in New York conducting my research on inclusive accessible tourism as well as the universal design. I just wanted to speak about the research conducted in the United States. It was conducted by the Open Door organization. Odo has been studying the travel habits of adults with disabilities for over the decades, as you see on the slides. And these nationwide surveys gather insights directly from the travelers, aiming to measure the economic impact and travel patterns and the barriers they face. And let's take a look at some of the key findings on over these years. It started in 2002 when the Odo conducted the first study and found that the American with disabilities spent 13.6 billion annually on travel. This was really groundbreaking revelation showing the immense potential of this market. And again, in 2005, their second study confirmed the same, and it was 13.6 billion in annual spending, but it's also revealed that the frequency of the trips had increased. This hinted at growing confidence of the opportunities of travelers with disabilities. And again, by the 2015, the number has risen significantly. So travelers with disabilities spend 70.3 billion annually, reflecting the, of course, growing accessibility and awareness in the tourist industry. And the last study was conducted recently, and it was during the COVID period also, and it was in 2020. And the economic impact of disability travel skyrocketed to a surging 58.7 billion annually. So this growth was really attributed to advancement in the accessibility, more travel opportunities, and greater recognition of disability communities' contributions towards the travel industry. In conclusion, these numbers tell us important stories that the inclusive tourism is not only a matter of it's a major economic driver. By removing the barriers and promoting accessibility, we open doors not only just for the persons with disability, but also for the businesses and communities worldwide. So it's very important. This research was very important for our country also to show the tourist industry, to underline the economic impact and importance to implement and to start thinking about implementing the important standards and regulations. And
Tamar, may I hurry you just a little, please? You've got about 3 minutes left on my watch.
Okay, yes, I will go through very quickly. So next, can we go to the next slide? So this Igor has underlined the global policy, what were the important regulations and initiatives coming from the UNWTO, and importance of these global initiatives for Georgia is also quite important because just 1 minute, because as you know, Georgia is a member of the UNWTO executive board from 2021 to 2025, and this embraced the mission leveraging the strategic location to advocate for the tourist development in Black Sea and Eastern European regions. So Georgia's commitment is to introduce and promote the key directions of the UNWTO, and especially when we're talking about the San Marino Action Agenda to advance accessible tourism 2030. So I would like to underline that this agenda provides a clear roadmap for addressing and challenges of inclusive tourism while aligning these broader goals to the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So what we should do, we have to move forward and to as it is underlined in San Marino Action Agenda, all stakeholders should raise awareness and highlight the social and economic benefits of inclusive tourism. We should apply universal design principles. We should prioritize the accessibility even when there are limited resources, and we should encourage accessible entrepreneurship together with a very important point also to promote labor inclusion. So these San Marino Action Agenda and these important actions for Georgia is very important. Now our organizations, with our organization, non-governmental organization, together with the stakeholders in Tbilisi and different municipalities, we are working to advocate and raise awareness for government sector to apply these priority actions. Can we go to the next slide?
Okay, can I ask you to go forward, please, Tamar, because we're running short of time.
Yes, sure.
So please take.
Yeah, let's go for it. So importance of this first international standard for Georgia, it's IMERS. We whenever it was published and Ivor introduced us with this standard, we have immediately started to work towards introduction of the standards. And together with the Georgia National Tourism Administration, we have trained 800 tourist industry representatives on this ISO standard on accessible tourism. It was very important to raise awareness because the quality of services and many areas has a huge challenges. So it's very significant number when we are talking about the 800 stakeholders from tourism industry members. As for the pilot project that I was talking about, and these pilot projects were conducted in Tzcheta, and this is not the slide. Please go to the next slide. Yes, and next slide. Yeah, so this project was conducted in Tzcheta. This is a historical city, a former capital of Georgia, that holds immense cultural and historical significance. And it is a home of iconic landmarks, including the Svetozhoveli Cathedral, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, along with other remarkable historical monuments that have shaped the identity of Georgia. So Tzcheta is for it's very important historical cities, and these projects conducted in Tzcheta accessibility projects have had very quite important impact for other municipalities, because other municipalities have also tried to develop pilot projects to conduct accessibility projects and raise also awareness among the governmental representatives.
Tamar, sorry, I have to raise my hand here because we need to go to the next speaker, because then we have another session starting at 7.
Sure.
Local time.
Then I will.
Would you take us to the end? And
yes, of course. I will finalize. Let's go to the next slide. This last and very important pilot project was at the next slide, please. In Batumi, this is a very important Black Sea side region, and accessibility of the beach accessibility projects has been done. And can we go to the next slide to see the pictures? And it was really very important project, which is also for other Black Sea coast cities quite important to do the same. It has raised awareness and also supported the introduction of inclusive tourism and popularize this destination. And lastly, I would like to show very interesting 2 video clips.
I'm sorry, Tamar. We've cancelled your videos this time. There's no time.
Okay.
I'm sorry for that.
So these are the very 2-3 minute
so
video clips, if it will be possible.
I think they can be distributed afterwards by the
okay.
organizer as part
Thank
of
you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tamar. It's wonderful to hear about your good results actually in Georgia. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Invite Jeremy Buzzell now, who's working for the Park Accessibility for Visitors and Employees, National Parks USA. And Jeremy has been working in education for the Department of Education in the US, and has two decades of experience working in disability sector. So I hand over to you now, Jeremy, please.
Great, thank you. My name is Jeremy Buzzell. I am a white male in his 50s with short brown hair. I'm wearing some thick-rimmed glasses as well as a gray collared shirt. And you can bring the slides up at any time. And can you advance to the slide that has the photos on it, please? That one right there, yes. So many of you who are familiar with the National Park Service in the United States probably think about Yosemite or the Grand Canyon, or all the natural wonders that we preserve. But we actually have 400 different sites around the country, many of which preserve cultural resources and historic resources. We protect indigenous sites, we protect forts, we protect battlefields and monuments and historic homes. So we do a lot of work in cultural resource protection, which means we have to do a lot of work related to making cultural resources accessible. And that's where my program comes in, the Park Accessibility for Visitors and Employees program, where we work with our park sites to figure out creative ways to make our cultural resources more accessible. So what I'm going to share today is what's behind our thinking and our approach when we talk with parks about creating accessibility in cultural tourism sites. Next slide, please. So the big question that we get, and I would assume that many of you who work in this space get, is which one is more important, preserving the history of a cultural tourism site or making that site accessible? Because the two of those things very often come into conflict with each other. In order to make a site accessible, you may have to change its character, and by changing its character, you might change some of its historic nature. So we face this question all the time, and we are usually brought in as a team who understands accessibility to meet with the people who understand history and resources and try to settle that question. Next slide, please. So the answer that we have to the question of which one is more important is that neither of them is more important. They are both equally important. And what we have to do is figure out how do we achieve balance between creating accessibility and preserving the resource. One of the reasons for that is people with disabilities also want the resource to be preserved. They also want to experience the history, and in many cases don't want to have to sacrifice the historic nature of the site for accessibility. So how do we achieve balance when we try to approach making cultural sites accessible? So the first thing we need to do is we take an approach where we want to engage the right stakeholders. We want to frame the right argument. We want to start from the right place, and we want to ask the right questions when we sit down across the table from the people who are the preservationists or the engineers or any number of folks who are involved in thinking about how we might change a site to make it accessible. Next slide, please. So when we want to engage the right stakeholders, We need to have balanced input if we want a balanced outcome, which means it's not right for me to have more people who are focused really strongly on accessibility. And it's also not fair if it's only people who are focused on preservation. We have to make sure that we have some talking from each side so that a preservationist can understand where the disability community is coming from, and the disability community can understand where a preservationist is coming from. So we have to make sure we have all different perspectives at the table, and that includes also making sure that we have multiple perspectives from the disability community, because accessibility is not just about people who use mobility devices, but we're also talking about how we make this site accessible to people who can't see, how we make this site accessible to people who can't hear, how we make this site accessible to people with intellectual disabilities. So it's having a robust group of people with all different perspectives, but we also have to make sure that none of those people are really, really, really inflexible, or they are really hard line on anything. The way we talk about it is we are negotiating to find a balance. It is not about one side giving in to the other side. It is about us understanding each other's perspectives and then coming up with solutions that we can come up with to try to meet somewhere in the middle to balance preservation and accessibility. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and I can only speak from the side of accessibility because that's where my life is, when we try to talk to people who are on the side of preservation and history, it really doesn't work for us usually to say, well, we should do this because we're required to do it. We have a law in America that would require us to do it. However, the people who want to preserve the site also have laws that tell them, well, I have a law that tells me I need to preserve it. So we don't tend to start from well, you're required to do it, therefore you should do it. That doesn't really resonate with people. Here in America, people with disabilities would have an individual right to sue us if things are not accessible. So we do say, listen, we should probably make this accessible on our own terms rather than having somebody file a complaint and having a court order that tells us how and when we shall do it. We also really emphasize that this is a form of discrimination. Are there groups of people that we would proactively decide to exclude from going to this site? We wouldn't say, oh, only men can go to this site. We wouldn't say only people of this religion can go to this site and enjoy it, right? But if we say only people who don't have disabilities can go to this site, we're discriminating against people with disabilities. The other thing, one of the arguments I make is you need to accept that you are not necessarily doing this for other people. You are doing this for future you. You might have a disability in the future. You might have a relative or a child or a grandparent who has a disability in the future. So think about what you want to tell that family member when the site that you manage is not accessible. And lastly, we need to look at what are the compelling reasons for people with disabilities to visit the site. There might be some people, like if we have a battlefield, there might be some people for whom there's living history. They might have relatives who were connected to the history there. Or is there perhaps a disability history and disability community connection to the site? For example, one of the homes that we preserve is the home of Franklin Roosevelt, who was a president with a disability. And that might be a compelling reason for a person with a disability to visit that site. Next slide, please. So we want to have the right argument on our side for why it's important to make sure this site is accessible and to not ignore it to preserve history. However, we also need to come from the right place, right? I don't like it when we start out by saying we will provide some sort of video or some sort of virtual experience, and that's just the first way we plan to solve the problem. I don't want to start there. I want to start with what the ideal circumstance is and then work our way backward. I also don't like starting from a place where we call separate but equal, where we say, oh, well, we'll just have them enter here and we'll have them go down this path that nobody else is going to go down. I don't like starting there. That may be where we end up, but I don't want to start there. So we want to have a conversation about what would this site look like if it was universally designed, and go backwards from there, right? And then ask ourselves, well, is there a point of visiting the site if we have transformed it in those ways? Is there a point in visiting the site if the access is only virtual? Like, why would I go if I could have the same experience online because it's in virtual reality? We also want to make sure that we recognize where we are biased on both sides, right? How hard line am I on this site? And, you know, there might be a site where the history to me is not that compelling. So maybe I feel strongly about making it accessible, but that doesn't, just because it's not compelling to me doesn't mean it's not compelling to other people. And we also want to make sure we're narrowing down what are the essential elements, right? Like we have to make sure no matter what happens, I can get from the parking lot to the entrance, I can get into the site, I can navigate the site, I can use a bathroom or a water fountain at the site. I can learn about the layout and I can learn about the history of the site. Because if I can't learn about the history of the site, then why would I be going there? Next slide, please. We also need to ask a lot of questions, right? I need to understand what about this site are we trying to preserve and why are we trying to preserve it? Because that will help lead me in my decisions about what are the critical things to make accessible. Who is this preservation going to be important to? And a big thing is understanding how do visitors use this site, because that will dictate a lot of our solutions. Are there things that have already been modified where we've already changed the historic character of it that we might be able to play with more? Are there non-negotiable structural limitations, meaning we can't put an elevator in here because the building will fall down because it can't bear that kind of weight? And the big thing for us is, listen, how close can we get to making it accessible? We might not be able to make it meet every accessibility code we'd like to, but what if we can get close? We might not be able to make a door 36 inches wide, but what if we could make it 33 inches wide? That's still better than 28 inches wide.
Jeremy,
Yes.
sorry, we're right there up against the limit. So your last comment, please.
Yeah, actually, if you go to the next slide, that'll be it.
You're there.
Yes. So we do a lot of things where we do temporary or removable solutions. We replace things with in-kind things. We fabricate reproductions. In a lot of cases, we might just limit access to everyone. We might have something where we say, no one can go in this room. Everyone has to stop at the door and look through the door. Or we'll move things to move amenities to accessible locations. So I will stop there and turn it back over to you.
Jeremy. Jeremy Buzzell, it's been a great pleasure to hear you, and in such a pedagogical way as well. You've given us an excellent insight into how you're working in parks in America to make to balance the heritage values and the accessibility requirements. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Over to Eilat.
I think I just want to say right now that this was a fascinating session, and it's a fabulous lead-in to our next session where we talk about how we actually take these challenges that you all brought up, the laws, the ability to make changes, the balance between what accessibility and heritage means and to who, and how they've been actually assimilated into Jerusalem and into Rome.